Chris was unfortunate because he was born with cerebral palsy. He can only move his left foot, but Chris was also lucky because his mother, Brenda, who loved her so much, didn't give up on him. Brenda would save up her spare change to buy Chris a wheelchair. After every meal, Brenda would carry Chris upstairs. Suddenly, Chris heard his mother fall. Chris used his left foot to move a little. When he saw his mother lying on the floor, Chris accelerated his pace and slid down the stairs to her side. Chris kicked the door with his left foot, hoping that a neighbor would hear him. The neighbors heard Chris and called an ambulance. As a thank you, Brenda made Chris a stroller so Chris could play with the kids more often. Brenda would often take Chris to church to pray for his recovery. Chris understood his mom's love, but he couldn't say a word. With his left foot, Chris drew a symbol on the floor with a piece of chalk. No one knew what Chris was trying to say. Brenda said, "That's Anna." Chris nodded happily. Chris started writing letters on the floor again. The family watched to see what Chris was trying to say. Chris was sweating profusely even though he had only written 3 letters. Chris wrote mother on the floor. His mom, Brenda, was in tears. Soon Chris turned 18. Brenda made Chris a beautiful cake. Brenda also customized a wheelchair for Chris. To help Chris recover, Brenda hired a rehabilitation doctor, Dr. Irene. Chris refused for fear of adding to his family's financial burden. When he heard that the treatment was free, Chris smiled happily again. With Dr. Irene's help, Chris' health improved dramatically. Slowly, Chris developed a deep affection for Dr. Irene. Brenda was afraid that her son would be hurt emotionally. A businessman took a liking to Chris' paintings and gave him an exhibition. Chris' paintings received a lot of attention. At the final celebration party, Chris boldly confessed his love to Irene. When he found out that Irene was going to get married, Chris drank a lot. Back home, Chris wrote a suicide note. Chris held the razor with his left foot and tried to slit his wrists, but he couldn't. Brenda encouraged Chris to focus on his painting and let go of his love for a while. In order to give Chris his own studio, Brenda decided to build Chris a small house. Looking at his mother's busybody, Chris finally decided to help her build the house. In his own studio, Chris created many works of art. Friends encouraged Chris to write a book about himself. Soon Chris received a large sum of money for his book, My Left Foot. Chris snuck the money into Brenda's piggy bank. At dinner, Chris joked with his mom that he wanted ice cream. When Brenda opened the piggy bank, the kids laughed. Brenda looked at the money on the table and knew she didn't have to work so hard anymore. Years later, when Irene came to invite Chris to a party for disabled artists, Chris happily said yes. As Irene pushed Chris into the room, Chris was welcomed with open arms. With his left foot, Chris became a famous painter and writer in Ireland. At the end of the story, Chris also gained his own love. Let's cherish every person and every emotion around us and embrace every moment of life with love and warmth.